Hi, Lauren Grace here, and welcome to the Afterlight Podcast. And I'm joined today by Natasha Ritz. Natasha is a self-proclaimed explorer of the internal world. Souling is her first book, and a book that she's written that was born of personal experiences in conjunction with academic learnings from her behavioral sciences work. Natasha is a business leader, having led and run multiple businesses in the social enterprise space, helping founders and leaders to bring their vision. She brings unique storytelling and knowledge from varied experiences in her life to support the reader on their journey of souling and entering into their innermost self. Today, we are going to be talking about some big subjects. We're going to be talking about souling. What is it exactly? Is it something that Natasha made up? We're going to be talking about the power of curiosity, exploring judgment and triggering, when those people kind of rub you the wrong way, whether or not there's something there for us to learn. We're going to be talking and delving into the concept of what is self-awareness, the power of vulnerability, and how to go there, and how to listen to our intuition to start to take action. Natasha, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So just for our listener at home, if you notice me stumbling, it's because I just got back from the dentist. And so part of my mouth is numb. And, that's okay, though. That's how we roll. I really wanted to make sure that I brought Natasha on today because I feel like your message, Natasha, is really apropos to some of the things that I'm currently working in. I just created a whole document on discovering your soul's purpose. And then I'm meeting with you today. So I was like, oh, this is really in alignment. So before we delve into the big subjects that we're going to be talking about today, because I know that we're going to really get into the deep stuff here today, tell me a little bit about how your spiritual journey began. Have you always been spiritual? Have you always understood or felt that we have a soul? Or did something happen that kind of opened up your awareness to that?
You know what? It's been a real journey coming to spirituality in a way that felt good and authentic and aligned for me. And I actually have to be honest that probably started off this journey about 10 years ago and thought that I was an atheist. So I have a Jewish family. We have a fairly sort of secular background. And so we sometimes played into the traditions or the cultural, side of Judaism, but not so much so that I felt connected spiritually at all. And I still don't necessarily feel connected spiritually to any religious movement or sect at all. So it's taken me a really long time to figure out what is spirituality to me. And I would say I've come to it through really varied modalities, from meditation to mindfulness to breath work to sound and movement to exploring my own sexuality to music and singing and expression and creativity. And also, I guess, through an understanding of the self by practicing psychology, and having coaches and just kind of just trying everything and not leaving anything behind so that I can figure out a way in that makes sense for me and I can build a spiritual connection and narrative in a way that resonates for me. So it's taken many years and I guess many evolutions of the self to get to a place where I think, yeah, I'm a deeply spiritual person. I feel really connected to Mother Earth, to nature, to the concept of oneness and connectedness of all of humanity. And I do that, I think, through questioning and critical thinking and applying lots of theories and constantly being open to learning and change and being curious about how other people approach their spirituality or their lives or their souls. And so I suppose for me, there's no one way to do this. There's no one approach. And there's always just this openness and evolution of what does spirituality and the soul mean for me.
I noticed in your book you had a tell of a lot of references. One of the things that I really liked is you gave a lot of references at the end of the chapters as well. But then at the very end, it was like, whoa, you must have been doing a lot of reading. And, when you're talking and just sort of summarizing a bit of your journey here, I do hear you talking a lot about almost looking at things from an intellectual point of view. Where do you feel feeling fits into your own journey? Or do you find that you're somebody who thinks a lot versus feeling, or do you have a combination of the two?
Oh, I think it's a combination of the two, but I think where I started was the intellectualizing, the logicizing everything. I started in that masculine energy space. It's the space that we're taught is, it's logic and strategy and forward movement, and thinking is the key to life, and that's the kind
Yeah.
of narrative that exists. But it's the emotion and the feeling that gets us in touch with the truth of who we are. It opens us up to our intuition, which I sort of believe we're in this push-pull feeling with because of what we're taught in society says,
Yeah.
it's not okay to sometimes feel particular feelings or emotions. We frame them around negative emotions, which, quote unquote, and positive emotions, quote unquote. But actually, they're all just an array of human emotions that we have access to. It's like this rainbow or plethora of things that we can access. And in giving myself permission and the opportunity to access the spectrum of my emotions without the underlying feeling of guilt or shame for allowing myself to go there, rather than being in like a toxically positive cycle or in just over intellectualizing everything, you give yourself more access to just the simple truth of who you are and the simple truth of I'm having an emotion. This emotion is like a tunnel that I can walk through with a beginning, a middle, and end. And it's okay for me to experience whatever that is and allow it to wash over. And so it's taken years for me to get to that place of safety to explore any emotion. But I've found that the more open I am to it, the more access I have to knowing the truth of who I really am. So I become more self-aware when I'm accessing my emotions, and I feel more disconnected from myself when I'm trying to intellectualize or logicize everything in my brain.
Uh-huh. I think that a lot of people who listen to this podcast are empathic, so they would really resonate with the feeling side of things. But then I also feel that a big part about being on the spiritual journey, and I can only really speak for myself here, is that we do read a lot, we do learn a lot. We're in these workshops or these courses, or reading books and podcasts and things of that nature, so we're always in the mind as well. And I don't know about you, I mean, you said that it's sort of almost something that you've learned to do or you practice, but I find it sometimes challenging to not be in my mind and to actually quiet the mind to then get into the body to feel. And then on the flip side, as an empath, when I feel everything to such a degree, sometimes you don't even want to go there either. So you bounce back almost to the intellect. So it's this really interesting dance, isn't it?
Yes, the paradox of humanity, I suppose.
Yeah, you talk
Yeah,
about that in your book as well, don't you? Like almost the different sides of things,
yes, everything
Yes,
in
yeah,
polarity or everything
yeah,
in duality, and those sides of humanity on this huge continuum. And I suppose like practical actions that I take when my mind is so wild and crazy. And I think as women, our minds kind of never switch off, which can be quite challenging.
yeah.
But breath work for me has been one of the most powerful tools to go into a place where I can completely switch off the prefrontal cortex, which there's studies and research to show that when you do certain types of breath work, like holotropic breath work, you can actually switch off that ever thinking narrative part of the brain, which allows you to access the body. So move into that more sort of somatic, holistic healing of being within the body. And that's a really helpful tool to access those parts of yourself. And then I think on the other side, like you were sharing around, sometimes when we go into deep feeling of empathy and compassion, which is also very feminine. It's, you're absorbing a lot of other people's emotional states. And there's that need, I think, sometimes to set a boundary for ourselves about how much energy we're allowing ourselves to absorb and taking responsibility for that. And I was once seeing an incredible psychologist and Reiki healer who taught me that in order to block some of that empathic suction that I was so doing by wanting
Yeah.
to help people and support people, was actually to physically cover my hand over my belly button to
Ah,
block, to block my energy and their energy from spilling in and out of each other's systems or bodies or auras, or where the energy meets, often in that figure 8 kind of cycle. And that was a really helpful tool for me when I needed to stop and set a boundary for myself about how much I was willing to absorb of other people's emotional state.
that's really powerful, because I have heard, people say to me before, they're like, oh, you can just turn it down like a dial, turn it down. But it's like, it's one thing to do that, but sometimes we need that physical action, like you're saying, of the hand. I'm like, I can put my hand over my belly button when I'm having a difficult conversation with someone, or when there's something that's going on in my environment. That seems something that it's not weird to do either, because sometimes if I go, wait a minute, I just got to turn down this dial, then I'm going to, like, just try to create some kind of change here. Okay, yeah, that's a really helpful thing. Can you give an example as well of the breathwork technique that you just explained there? What did you
Yes,
say it was
it's a
called? The holotropic or something?
holotropic holotropic breath work.
Yeah.
And there's a really amazing breathwork facilitator I work with here. His name is Dave Murphy. And basically, the way that he teaches it, it's a 2-part breath. So the first part of the inhale is into the base of the stomach, like you would for yoga. And there's a second part of the inhale into the chest. So it would be like it would sound something like, and then your exhale is a long exhale out the mouth. So what you're essentially doing is you're creating a full inhale breath that fills every part of the chest or torso and your lower base of your gut. And so you don't leave any room for any extra breath to enter, and then a full release. And you do that in a fairly sort of natural pattern that feels good for you. And you can do it for, say, between 5 minutes to 30 minutes. When you get to sort of about 10 minutes is when you start to feel your prefrontal cortex turn off. And it's a
Oh,
really interesting sensation. So it's like, what happens is you go through all this mental resistance. So in the first sort of maybe 5 to 7 minutes, you're like, is this even working? Am I doing it right? Why am I doing this? I don't really want to be here. Like, you might have a billion thoughts of resistance. And then you just keep going with it, keep with the practice. Two parts inhale, 1 part exhale, moving, get music to support you to go through that process. By the time you get to about the 3rd song, suddenly there's just this like almost euphoric silence. And you're like, wow,
yeah.
okay, this is happening. And then you keep going. And then what can happen is you can get like tingly in the hands, and your hands can actually crunch up a little bit like this. You can feel like in your hands and feet they're crunching, and you feel like you don't have control of your hands and feet. You can feel tingling all along the jaw, around here, or you might feel like you're clenching, or you have tightness around here. You can feel like really interesting tightness going in certain parts of your body. For example, if you have like solar plexus chakra release stuff you need to do, you can feel tension in the gut.
Mm.
And I have felt at times like someone's standing on my gut or on my heart, and you think, oh, am I ever going to get out of this, or is this my life now? And so it can generate fear, and lots of things can kind of happen. And then at the end of the 30 minutes, what you normally do is do a breath hold. And you can hold your breath incredibly, because you're over oxygenating your brain for about 4 minutes. And it's wild what happens when you hold your breath. All this light seems to appear. Your eyes are closed, but you see light. And then you can kind of visualize what appear to me as being some of the most deeply parts of being connected to your higher self, to oneness, to anyone else in the space, if you're doing it in a group space. And it's very visual. It's almost as if you're on like a mushroom trip. It's wild, but
Wow.
incredible.
Wow, that's so cool. Okay, thank you for that. And for our listener at home, obviously, you want to make sure that you're using your due diligence and your discernment. If you have any breathing issues or anything, don't do that and see a doctor if you need to. Just throw that in
Yes.
there.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes. So that's really interesting because I think that when you're talking about that, I go, oh, the minute that discomfort would come up, I would imagine that most people shut it down and they block that, right? They would go, okay, no, I can't even go there. But what you're kind of saying is if you can persevere through that, what you're able to do is actually almost unblock parts of that energy that's been stored there, that resistance that's coming up, and then being awashed in that light feeling almost is that restorative part that you're gunning for.
That's it. That's it.
Yeah.
And, the process of it is really fascinatingly like any healing process, right? Sometimes, depending on what you're working on, the healing process can sometimes feel really long. And, let's say you're working through the psychology medium or whatever, and working through your problems psychologically or through the mind, and you'll have resistance in that space too. And it's really the same pattern. So it's, when you're going through breath work, for example, it's a really short-lived process and short-lived modality of any kind of healing work you'll ever do, because you'll start the thing, you'll have major resistance, you'll maybe even feel defensive towards yourself about these changes. Then you push through the other side of that, and that's where the magic happens. So it's kind of any healing, I think, has that same process or that same feeling
Yeah.
related to it. And breath work's a really fast approach to get to it.
How often would you do something like that? Is it a weekly thing or a monthly thing or just whenever you're maybe
It's
feeling stressed?
I think it's up to the person. Like for a while I was doing it weekly, then I moved to monthly. Now I'm kind of doing it sporadically. Sometimes I
Yeah.
do it on my own, sometimes I do it in a group. So it's kind
Yeah.
of like whatever you feel like at the time.
Yeah, that's cool. And you're talking about getting that peaceful moment in your brain. And I see that you're a fan of Eckhart Tolle's work, and he's my main man. I love his work. Yeah, he's the guy, y'all. He's the guy. Yeah. So
Yes.
I have experienced moments of that peace. I will say doesn't always last for long, but definitely when I'm in it, it's like, oh wow. You just feel that you're connected to all that there is. I did this really beautiful meditation with this on Empower You Radio. It's the Hay House radio app. Anyway, there's this guy on there, Dick Sutphin, and he's a hypnotherapist. And I did a meditation with him, and he was talking about it's a guided meditation. But one of the things I love about him is he creates a lot of space for you, like 15 minutes of space for you to just do your thing and just be where you are. And one of the ones was about becoming the light. And I remember doing this meditation, and you ascend and you ascend and you ascend. And then all of a sudden, it's like I look down and I have no body, and I am just one with the light. And I feel that a lot of the things that I've been learning about, a lot of the books that I'm reading, or the teachers that I'm learning from, albeit via podcasts or audiobooks or books themselves, talk a lot about the light and being restored by the light. And I think that, when we remember that we're energy, and I guess we can get into the soul concept as well, because I want to find out what is souling, but when you're awash with the light, like you're saying, it's this renewal, it's this rebirth opportunity, and it's the secret, kind of antidote, I feel, to a lot of the shit that we go through.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's just that memory of we all actually come from stardust, right?
Yeah.
And, like if you know that and you're open to that idea that we're all made of like chemicals and minerals and we're from the earth, we're nature, we're not separate from nature. We have consciousness, but our consciousness is nature. And I think when you start to look at yourself as nature, then you open yourself up more to the ability to connect to the oneness or the light that exists. And there is
Yeah.
so much of it, and it's infinite and forever and abundant. It's like love, it just pours out the heart. It is literally infinite. You don't have to ever withhold love from anyone or yourself, because it's forever and it can literally be turned on like a tap. So
Yeah.
it's that same thing. I think light is love, love is light. They're quite
Yes.
interchangeable.
Yes.
And you can find it by going inward, because you have all of it inside you.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. So what is the concept of souling? Is it something that you made up?
Yes,
I
I
love it.
made it up. And I've made up so many words in that book too, but there is a glossary. So essentially, souling is a verb. It's the act of experiencing your soul. And, it's something that was really important to me, because I like to take action on things. I like to feel like I have tools and
Yeah.
access points or portals and gateways into myself that give me more active tools and points of interaction, so that I can become more aware, that I can learn more about myself, that I can choose new actions, choose new behavior, that I can build new narratives, that I can constantly be curious and open to new concepts and ideas, and choose to accept or ignore them, and critically think and question all of the time. And that was what I
Mhm.
wanted this to be. I wanted it to be practical. I wanted as well it to be like an opening and um a safe point for anyone who's maybe not that spiritual, and have it be really practical and based in some theory and critical thinking, so that it was accessible for people who might consider spirituality as a bit woo woo. And if that is
Yeah.
someone who has that viewpoint, they have access to spirituality in a modality that might be a bit softer, or a
Yeah.
different way to approach it.
Yeah, I like that because we're all at different entry points. And even for people who would say they're deeply spiritual, as you referenced, you are, and I feel that I am as well, it's still accessible to us too. So that's one of the cool things about it. Um, when I was reading your book, one of the things that I was thinking about is the soul and the soul journey. And you referenced even in your book how we focus so much on the body and the physical. And, we were talking earlier about the intellect and things of that nature. It was just, when did it occur to you that there was some other level here that needed to be explored or that needed to be nurtured?
Gosh, I've never been asked that question. I think, again, it's been like a really slow unfurling of coming to that realization, where I was so engrossed in the broader patriarchal narratives at the macro structure that exist, that define our worth, particularly women, as related to our bodies, the way that we look, the way that we are. Um, we rank ourselves against each other, and I think I was so involved in that game for so long, of ranking myself and judging others, because I was just judging myself and feeling so awful about my body and berating parts of my body, until I realized that that was my own narrative, and it was becoming a choice and a cycle
Yeah.
of my own pattern of behavior that was holding me back from fulfilling my own potential, and also fulfilling my own needs. And I think I
Yeah.
realized that, there was this like huge opportunity to create more safety for myself about what it is to be human, and what the meaning of that is, and how I can then fulfill my needs in a more self-validating way, but also then share some of those ideas with other people, because I think the only way for us to break through some of those stories or those narratives that we're constantly fed, thousands of bits of data a day at all different micro and macro levels, is to put forward a new idea or put forward a new story. And that is, you know, really related to your worth has everything to do with your soul. It has everything to do with the innermost you. It has everything to do with what you give to yourself, the journey that you go on in this one life that you have. The fact that we are conscious, the fact that we live here now in this time as these tiny little blobs floating along a gigantic burning planet, in a solar system of an expansive universe is mind blowing.
Yeah.
And the opportunity to sort of perceive ourselves as tiny little blobby specks open the gateway for just like a calmer approach to like, okay, who am I and what meaning can I create in this one life? And how do I then share that with others?
So beautiful. Have you read or listened to Anita Moorjani's book, Dying to Be Me?
No, but I'll write it down
Oh,
for
write it
sure.
down. Yeah, you'll dig it. It's basically it's about this woman, and I talk about it in my episode last week for our listener at home if you're not caught up already. She talks about her near-death experience. And spoiler alert, but what she learns from it is that nurturing the soul, but she talks about it in terms of this self-love and honoring ourselves and doing the things that make us feel good and lift us up. And I think a big part about it, life in general, but I think especially as women, is we have this nurturing intuition, we have this nurturing instinct to really want to give and give and give to others. And one of the things that I see a lot of women struggling with is am I deserving to give to myself first when there's somebody else in need? And I think that's a big part about where we can sometimes trip up or get caught up. But I love that, when we can get curious with why we're doing things or not doing things, when we can look around us in our environment and see who's maybe triggering us in a certain way. Is there something about that person that they're shining this light and we wish we could do the same thing? Or is there somebody who's maybe giving too much to themselves and not enough to their children, for example? And there's all these opportunities for us to kind of explore that. How do you tap into the idea of being a little bit more curious about your own behavior, about the thoughts that you're feeling, about the way that you're acting, but also not having that judgment come in, having that compassion and that love come in instead of that berating voice that's kind of telling you to be different than the way that you are?
Yeah, great question. And it is challenging, right? Because
Yeah.
our internal narratives are constant. And sometimes they actually never go away. So, how we manage them and how we choose to listen or not is probably the opportunity. But I think probably where I see like all of the things that I think that we have around us is what we create in our lives. So all of the things from our work life, family life, financial situation, are often mirrors for our internal world. So what we see around us is mirroring everything that we are putting out into the world energetically,
Mm.
behaviorally. And so everything that we have, we can constantly be asking ourselves questions. Okay, if I have this, why do I want this? Why have I attracted this particular thing, no matter what part of it, life it might be? But it is mirroring something about me that I need to look at. And so I guess employing curiosity is a really nice approach because in that way, curiosity is very unjudging, right? It's very much like, okay, I can hold this particular thought in suspension and I can walk around it and ask lots of questions of, okay, why do I have this particular thought right now? What's the emotion that I have related to this thought? What actions do I take based off the emotions that I have around the thought? Could I choose a different thought? Could I choose a different emotion? Could I allow myself to feel it, or have I been blocking it? Or you just allow yourself the, I suppose, analytical approach of whatever it is that you're experiencing, and then walk through that with holding your own hand as if it's the child version of you and really being like, it's okay. Like, because if you were 5 or if there was a 5-year-old and they were experiencing these big emotions and having these challenging things or repeated patterns of behavior again and again, it's probably your child self. And so if you can have compassion for your child self and walk with yourself to guide reparent yourself through whatever it is you're experiencing, that way you can approach it with more compassion, I think, because we're always much more kinder, usually, to children than we are to ourselves.
Yeah.
And I guess the other thought just there is like, sometimes when you go back into those old patterns of behavior or the deep judgment or the harsh narrative that can be intrusive and appear, it's less about thinking, oh, why am I back here again? I thought I'd got through this, and
Yeah.
I thought I stopped being a judgy asshole, but here I am again. And it's really like, that's actually okay. Like, you are human and you're gonna have those things happen to you. You don't become enlightened every time you know, like, go through a new breakthrough. Your journey is forever, and it only stops when you die. So you're always going to make mistakes. You're always going to go back to your most childlike behavioral patterns. And you either just have to choose to accept it, honor it, choose a new behavior, allow yourself to have those thoughts, be compassionate and have empathy for yourself like you would another person who's having that experience. And I think, yeah, just be allowing yourself to be curious about it is really important. There was
Mm.
something else that you said as well that I just quickly want to touch on, which is just around language use. And
Mm.
you were talking about this idea around like selfishness or selflessness, or when we do things for each other, and um, women are constantly giving and over giving, I think, a lot of the time, from quite empty buckets. Um, but language to me is really important and something we can play with and choose to change, and narrative and language, and it all kind of goes hand in hand. And I guess what I'd like to always put to people is like, could you reframe the way certain words are or what they mean? So for example, if we break up the word selfish into two parts, self and ish, then you can think about, first of all, the self as the main sort of premise of that word. And if it's just a little ish, like a bit of a meh, an ish of itself, then when you're being selfish, you're kind of just being a little bit meh
Meh.
towards yourself. And so it's a new way to think about the word. And selfless, for example, as well, if you break up the word into the two parts, you have the self. And then if you're less, you're being less of yourself. So you're less in your authenticity and you're not giving your all because you're just less of yourself. So, if you can reframe words sometimes, that can be really helpful. And then thinking about, okay, so what does that all mean and how do we change it? And what it could mean is that we talk about self-fulfilling, self-validating, self-loving, self-holding, self-centering in a more positive light, instead of continuing to wrap our language around the same thing that's always existed.
Mm. I like that a lot. And I think that in order for us to change things, we have to change those narratives as well. We have to kind of look at reframing those things. One of the words that I'm wanting to eliminate from my vocabulary, and I used it earlier, but I used it because I felt that our listener at home may connect to it, is the word struggling. I don't like that word. I feel that that word really kind of implies that there's a powerlessness there, when I'm kind of looking at, can we reframe that to maybe challenging or challenge, right? So anyway, maybe I shouldn't have used it as an example earlier, but I feel that when we look at that word, we go, oh yeah, I can relate to what that is. But I think that if we can reframe it like you're talking about and put us in a point of going, oh, it's just something that I'm working through or working on, as opposed to kind of drowning within that. One of the things that I've learned recently, or that I really love about, when I get to speak with different speakers such as yourself, is understanding the way that people look at triggering, is understanding the way that people look at challenges in their lives. And I think that a big part about my journey is that when something is triggering me or there is a challenge that's happening, is remembering, and sometimes it's easier to do this than other times, that there's an opportunity there. So, what does this have to teach me? Or what is this showing me, like you said, about myself? What is this mirroring back to me? That can be really difficult to do. In your book, you talked about a woman that you felt really triggered by that you didn't even know. And then eventually over time, you kind of understood that maybe it was a representation of you and you really kind of opened up to that new relationship. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yes. So I always think that the things that trigger us most are mirroring our biggest challenges that we have about ourselves. So let's say, when we don't like a person, or, when we're like a little judgy, or kind of like, they're annoying, or we make comments about other people that are negative or whatever. I've come to learn that most of the time when I'm in that state of mind, which is dysfunctional but also human, that I'm usually pointing fingers back at myself and being reflected about something that I can see in myself that I don't really like in that other
Mm.
person. And so that's what I was talking about in that chapter. This woman was loud, and everything I felt was turned up so high, and I felt like she was overcompensating and inauthentic, and I was like, why am I so frustrated by this person? And I realized it's because that is what I'm like when I'm feeling out of sorts, when I'm feeling insecure, when I'm feeling potentially judgmental about my body, not lovable, not enough. I do all those things. I overcompensate. I'm loud. I'm a know it all. I'm all these things that I was seeing reflected in this other person. And I thought, oh, okay, I can practice loving this person. And you can love anyone, right? It doesn't love, we hold such weird things about love, I think, in society as well. But I think we can express and explore and explode and share our love because it's infinite around anyone. And so that's what I chose to do once I got through the resistance of like trying to, be the elite one and push myself above this other person, only to realize what, you know, she was me. And then I ended up putting my arm around her and saying, "Hey, Twinny." And she was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, hey." And we ended up having a great chat. And she was lovely and warm and kind and had many wonderful attributes. And so it was a real lesson for me in judgment and in mirrors, basically, that are all around us constantly if we're open to learning from them.
Mm. In your book, you're very vulnerable, and even now sharing that story and kind of almost talking about qualities that we would go, oh, like being loud and overcompensating. Those aren't necessarily qualities that we want to talk about publicly, but how do you become vulnerable? How do you be okay with that? Is it that you understand and accept yourself, and so that's enough, and so the opinions of other people? Because I know that, yeah, I can definitely be loud, I can definitely be a lot for people, and I don't really think that it's necessarily negative, because sometimes we have to be sometimes people need the voice of reason, let's just be real.
Totally.
But at the same
Yeah.
time, it's, yeah, maybe it's yeah, it's just, I guess I'm asking twofold questions. I'm not trying to say that judging ourselves based on some of the natural tendencies that we have is negative, but almost like explaining them or sharing them. And you shared some pretty vulnerable stuff as well in your book. I mean, how did you feel okay with that?
Yeah. Look, I think what I was aiming to do was provide a really truthful, honest experience that's just a human experience. And I think so often, we're in this world where we're trying to create these false senses of our reality through social media. You only see the best of people, their highlight reels of their lives, and people are editing themselves. And, it's not really the truth of what the human experience is. We have such an array of things that happen in our lives, and we face challenges. And rather than trying to be toxically positive about, you know, all these challenges, I was just being really honest about the truth of the hard things. And I think I was able to be really vulnerable in honesty because I had to start to become vulnerable when I contracted herpes, because I had to be able to have open communication with every sexual partner that I had from there on out about my STD status. And in doing so, I pushed myself into cycles of shame, because every time I had to have that conversation, I was so ashamed and I felt disgusting and, not enough and unlovable and gross. And so I put myself in situations that was reflective of how I felt about myself too, and then kept myself in those cycles of shame until I could kind of understand why why did I contract this, and did I actually do this to myself? And if so, what have I made this mean about me, and what am I making it mean about me now? And being really
Mm.
vulnerable, constantly having those conversations when you are, when you're about to have sex with someone, you're so vulnerable anyway, because you're naked and like, you're physically naked, you're emotionally naked, you're spiritually naked. And when you then have to share something shameful that you feel ashamed of, that's not shameful itself, but has a lot of taboos around it, you become a lot less triggered by the requirement of being vulnerable to connect with people. Like, everyone goes through challenges, and my, I guess, approach to being just open and honest and truthful about hard things has meant that other people are also open and truthful and more self-reflective and more aware, and they feel safe with me because I'm safe with myself, because I know who I am and all the good, bad, and ugly. I know my shadow as well as I know my ego and light. And when you know the more darker things about who you are, then you can have more honest conversations.
Mm. Do you think that, there's such a thing as good or bad, or I feel that we sometimes add these connotations, but they're not really. As I get older and as I explore spirituality and my own beliefs and my thoughts, I don't really believe in good and bad anymore. I just believe that things are as they are. And I also don't believe that we should ever assume to know what someone else's journey looks like, whether it's good or whether it's bad. When you're expressing, your challenges with, having these difficult conversations with people, I mean, look at how brave that you are. Look at how forthcoming, and look at how resilient, and yeah, there's this part of yourself that I'm sure that you never knew existed that you tap into when you have to have those difficult conversations. So, any thoughts sort of on that?
Yeah, I think you're right too. Like, I agree that there is no really good or bad. Like, I think, for example, with emotions, Brene Brown says we have 87 emotions, and there is such a spectrum of humanity and all of those emotions, and they've been branded as good emotions, quote unquote, or bad
Yeah.
emotions,
Or
quote
yeah.
unquote. And we've been told, particularly as women, that we need to be feeling joy and happy and serving and empathy and compassion and all of these like really light and lovely things. But all emotions have duality. They're all in a continuum or polarity, the opposite sides. And in order to know an emotion in a holistic sense, we must know both sides of it. So in order to know love, we have to know grief. In order to know joy, we have to know pain or sadness, and we have to feel these things. And for so long, trust me, I tried not to. And I wanted to steal everybody else's pain too. I was like, nope, bad feeling. I'll take it. Don't worry. I'm an empath. I'll absorb all of your stuff too. And then I'll carry it along and we'll all be sad together. But that's not helpful either. And people honestly just need to be seen, heard, and understood. We don't need to solve everyone's problems by giving them advice. Sometimes they literally just need to be heard. And I think the idea that people feeling pain is bad needs to stop, because people feeling pain is human. It's just human. And it's an experience that we're all going to go through. You can't avoid pain for your whole life, because people you love are going to die, and things that you want, you're not going to get. And, this is life. Like, it's filled to the brim with a mix of things, and it's never linear. It is always a total clusterfuck of things that just happen, and we have no control. The only control we really have is of ourselves, and how we choose to respond, and how we choose to think about things, and how we choose to question, and how we choose to allow ourselves the time and the space and the security and safety to go through the human experience. And I guess, so yeah, just to like round that out and come back to it, I think there is no good or bad. It's just, it is. And it's okay for us to experience all those things. And when you can come to terms with that, then having really difficult conversations becomes easier too, because you don't then become
Yeah.
responsible for somebody else's response to that thing. You
Yeah.
become less offended by how other people feel about that thing, because you know that that's their feeling, that's their emotional state, that's their, whole background of where they've come from and why they feel certain ways. You can't control that. And it's very freeing when you can start to really learn that and then put it into practice.
Mm. One of the things I wanted to say that I'm kind of trying to think about whether or not that even works. So I'll just say it out loud and we can work through it together. We can workshop it right now. But I was just thinking about, when we look at good and bad, it doesn't mean we have to like certain things. But if I say we don't have to like certain things, is that adding a good or bad connotation onto it? Is that me saying that, you have to like, do you know what I'm saying? Because I think that a big part about when we have these things of good or bad and difficult things that come up in our lives that we may look or label initially as being a bad thing, there's like this level where people go, but I don't want to accept that. And we would know from Eckhart's teachings, especially, that when we don't accept things as they are, that's when we actually suffer. But I think a big part about, understanding or being okay with the nothing is good and nothing is bad is also just accepting things as they are. But it doesn't mean that we have to be happy about it either. Have I explained that properly? Can
Totally.
you see where I'm having this kind of like moment of understanding? Yeah, confusion.
Yeah, that's a challenging and big concept, right? Because it's about preference, and it's also about like understanding the nuance within a thing, right? So it's, yes, you're going to feel pain, but to feel the pain sucks. But
Yeah,
you
yeah,
kind of
exactly.
you kind of have
Yeah,
to go through it, because if you
yeah,
block it, it's going to come out somewhere anyway. It's going to come out in disease, or it's going to come out in some other way, or it's going to burst out of you. And so, yeah, like, sometimes we've got to face these more challenging things, and sometimes they're going to suck. And that's
yeah,
humanity.
yeah, yeah. You've talked about toxic positivity quite a few times in this conversation. I'd love for you to kind of explain that to our listener. And before you go there, I do want to say that I feel that it's not when I was reading an article about toxic positivity, so I should probably let you finish this before I continue on. But I was like, what is this toxic positivity thing? And the article's perspective, and I'd love to hear what yours is, was about how in our culture we want to make everything better. So we don't allow people an opportunity to grieve. So for example, if you're getting a diagnosis you don't want, or you're getting an outcome you don't want, or you don't get the thing that you want, blah, 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 that we are going, oh, it's okay, girl, just put a Band-Aid over that and it'll be fine. Or just go put on a good song and dance it off and it'll be fine. And this article was talking a lot about how we don't give people the opportunity to grieve. And so for me, or to feel their feelings, like we've been talking about, I guess it's almost full circle we're coming here, but that I also don't like to wallow in the suck too much if I can help it, because I don't like living there. And it doesn't mean that I don't create space to feel that and then move forward. So I'd love to know your thoughts about it, especially dealing with some of the challenges that you've had in your life. Like, I'm sure looking at the positive side of things may have been a stretch at the time. So can you explain a little bit about your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I do agree with the premise of what that article was saying. And I think, the idea of toxic positivity is really around not allowing people to feel particular negative quote unquote feelings or
Yeah.
feelings of grief. It might be where a person, like someone passes away in somebody's life and a person says like everything happens for a reason. That is not helpful for a person who's grieving a death or a
Yeah.
loss, right? Because while you might believe that in your heart of hearts, what you're trying to do is make light of a situation that is painful and difficult and creates a lot of grief for people. So
Yeah.
really, it's so important to be able to allow space and silence and a capsule for people to feel whatever it is that they need to feel without you trying to solve or make good or make light of or put under the rug the tougher feeling that we so love to avoid. And the reason we love to avoid these things is because psychologically it puts us often into flight, fight, fawn, or freeze, right? So we
Right.
have our amygdala goes blah, upside down like a turtle, and its little legs are like, to do. And it's like this little freaked out primitive part of our brain that says like if we feel the bad thing like rejection or humiliation or grief, we're gonna die. And so
Right.
that's why
I
it feels
really
so
connect to that.
bad.
I always feel like I'm worry and fear, I think, for me, of what could, right? And then you go, oh, what could? And then it always ends with, and then I would die, or then I would be alone, and then I would probably die. Yeah.
That's it. And that's
Yeah.
because if you were alone a few thousand years ago, you probably would die because we needed
Yeah.
groups, we needed tribes of people to
Yeah.
survive, and we needed the collectiveness, and we still do, but it just looks a little bit different in the modern society. So that's why the feelings suck so much. But I think toxic positivity as well is the reason I touch on it so many times is because I was totally that person. And I think I had to get to the point where I understood that me trying to steal other people's negative emotions from them, like pain or whatever, was actually me self sacrificing myself in order to people please, take their emotions so they didn't have to feel that way. And then I could go back to safety because their emotions were now more equilibrium or happier or safe. And for a child, for me, that meant that I could then, everything was safe when I could bring the energy back down to a feeling of like, okay, everyone's feeling good feelings now, and now I'm safe here. And so that for me was why I created that pattern of behavior of always trying to make good, always trying to make pretty, keeping everyone's emotions in check. But it's not helpful because everyone
Yeah.
is responsible for their own responses and emotions. And I don't need to be in control of other people's emotions. And it's a farce anyway. I can't control other people's
Yeah.
emotions. And I don't need to self-sacrifice. I don't need to kick my inner child to the curb in order to help someone. Helping someone might be purely listening and saying nothing at all. And that's okay.
So did you feel that you were trying to save other people, maybe through, you're talking about taking on their emotion, but would you also think that it would be said in words like you were talking about, wanting to fix people just through pep
Totally.
talks and that kind of thing? Yeah.
Massive fixer, and like let's get
Yeah.
you to the other side, and I'm sure there's a way through this, and solving, which is masculine energy as well. And we
Right.
live in
Problem
this
solving.
masculine, yeah, we live in this super hyper masculine world, and it's not serving us because we're not feeling our emotions, and we're constantly trying to solve. And what the feminine does is it sits in love and presence. And God, we need feminine energy right now. We need women. We need all people to access their feminine energy. We need compassion. We need nurture. We need life-giving love, all of these things. And those can only be accessed when all and any person looks to access their feminine energy.
So we're just nearing the end of our time together. We didn't talk too much about all the subjects that I had because they're just so big. And what are you going to do in an hour, to cover off so many subjects? But one of the things that we didn't talk too much about yet was about intuition. And I would love if you would talk a bit about the intuition in terms of the divine feminine and connecting with that feminine energy, because intuition is a lot about going within and feeling the things that you're feeling, but also using your intuition as signposts and as guides to assist you with what serves you, what nurtures your soul, what doesn't. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I mean, for me, I'm an entrepreneur. A lot of people who listen to this show are soul-led entrepreneurs. They're spiritual women on their entrepreneurial journey. So we definitely have a lot of those masculine traits that have to come in because we have to do the strategic planning and the financial things and the asking and the goal setting and the fixing and the fixing and the fixing, right? The tech stuff, all the kind of doing sort of energy. But then at the same time, I feel that in order to be prosperous, abundant, wealthy, supported, we need to also take our foot off the gas pedal and allow ourselves to receive. And it's funny, I was going to tell you this after I hit record, but I'll just say now, when you were talking earlier, I had this vision of like this goddess come through, and I was trying to place what goddess, it felt like yeah, I don't even know, but it was like Asian inspired. And there was like this pool of water in a beautiful bowl. And she was kind of going like this, like almost like nurturing, and then like giving me and filling up this water, this pitcher of water for me to take and drink. And it was all around when we were talking about self-love and things of that nature. So I feel like that's a big part. That was very cool. Thank you for holding that space
Wow.
for me to be able to see
Wow.
that come
That's
through. I know you
amazing.
talk about visions in your book as well and having these sort of things come through. So, I mean, maybe that's what we need to do is we need to drink from the cup of the goddess. But yeah, tell me a bit about your thoughts.
Yes, we need to drink from the cup of the goddess. I love that. It's so nice that you received that vision. And that's such a perfect gateway into intuition, right? When we can allow ourselves the openness of exploring the stuff we just don't really know, right? You can't logicize your way through that. That's spiritual. That's, openness to oneness and connection with, an exchange of energy that we're having, and between the two of us, you were given this. And that is intuition in practice, right? It's like you can only really have that when you're open your heart, you open your third eye, like, and there's so many ways in. And I think the challenge that we have as women around accessing, or anyone accessing their intuition, is that there's a few hundred years of intergenerational trauma where we were burned at the stake for accessing our intuition. We were seen as witches, right? And hello,
Yeah.
I'm a witch and you're a witch. I can see it. So, it's like, this is the truth. And people find that really, really hard, but everyone can access this. And it's really around opening yourself up to the truth of who you are and being able to enter inwards. And intuition can feel like so many different things. From a physical perspective, it can feel like the little things, like the hair raised up on your skin or the back of your neck when you feel fear, or it can feel like a sudden gut punch for something, or it can feel like a verbal words coming to you about this doesn't feel right, or lie, or whatever it is that's coming to you. Or it could be a vision like what you had. It could be touch, you feel something on your hand, or pressure on your feet, or whatever it is. But that is intuition. And it's scary for people because it feels like it's outside of the self. And sometimes it can be, but mostly it is internal and it does come from you. And it's scary to trust that because for our lives, we've been told not to. We've been told to outsource our trust, to data to men to
Right.
institutions to, all of these things. And so when you're constantly told in all these different structures and systems that, we can't trust ourselves and we must trust all these other things, to come back to the truth of who you are is really challenging. But you can access yourself, I think, through a range of modalities, and you'll figure out what works for you, right? So it could be breath work, it could be meditation, it could be sound, it could be dance, it could be movement, it could be women's circles, it could be gaining access to the sacredness of your period again. It could be, looking at the moon. It could be your sexuality, how you explore sex with yourself or with another person. There are so many gateways in, and they're all gateways to your intuition. And your intuition can be felt in any part of your body, and however it comes to you is the truth of what it is. There's no right way to feel your intuition. It just is, like we were talking about before.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And I think a big part about where we get caught up is what you were saying earlier, is almost like we want to intellectualize things, whereas sometimes it's that gut knowing or that intuitive hit that we're getting where we actually don't have to go up to the mind and process it, where we just know it to be a certain way. One book as well I'll recommend to our listener at home, and I'd love to know if you read it, is the Rise Sister Rise book by Rebecca Campbell. Have you read that? Oh
I
my,
haven't, but I've heard about it.
it's amazing. It really made me feel when I listened to that book actually, and she narrated it, and it was so beautiful, but it talked a lot about sisterhood and connection with the cycles and connecting with the elements, and even your menstrual cycle like you were talking about, and the different phases of being a woman. And it really, for me, was a really powerful book. I'd highly recommend it to you and also to our listener. So, Natasha, we're at the end of our time. I know I ran us a little bit over. Sorry about that, but sorry, not sorry. How can people get a hold of you if they would like to? How can they pick up the book Souling? I know you're also available here in Australia and potentially the world beyond. We have got a lot of listeners over in North America as well for additional
Awesome.
workshops, support, that sort of thing. How can people get a hold of you? And also, is there anything that I didn't ask that you felt you wanted to speak on today before we wrap?
Thank you. So you can find Souling at souling.au. It's souling.au, or on Amazon. So whatever works for you. Souling.au is my website. So you can email me as well and connect that way if you want to. And what I always love to kind of like finish these podcasts on is actually a question, which is just, what do you need right now? And just allow people to really think about themselves and what they need. Because when do we ever ask ourselves that stuff?
Yeah. Mel Robbins talks about doing the high five habit, where you go in the mirror, you look at yourself, you can say to yourself, in your mind or out loud, what do I need, or what does support look like for me right now? And then, like you're talking about, is creating that space for a moment for that answer to come in. And it's not almost thinking of the answer and going, oh, I need a drink of water. It's like, okay, no, maybe I need a nap, or maybe there's something else here. Maybe I need to wear some pink today. I know you talked in your book about the power of color as well. You're talking about yellow, but when we wear pink, maybe to bring in that feminine energy and that sparkle and shine. So I love that. It's such a great tip. Well, thank you so much for being here on the show. Really enjoyed it, and look forward to having you back.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.